Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ELLICSR Kitchen class this afternoon. We have a very special guest today. First, I'm going to join my partner in crime, or I will introduce my partner in crime.
Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Jerry Capone. I'm the wellness chef for the Cancer Rehabilitation Survivorship Program. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a very exciting class, and I'm going to throw it back to Steph because we got a lot for you.
So it's Head and Neck Cancer Awareness Month, and we have a very special guest, registered dietitian. I'll let her introduce herself and flow into our program today.
Okay, thanks, Steph and Jeremy, for having me. So I'm Michelle, and I'm a dietitian in the Head and Neck Cancer Survivorship Program at Princess Margaret Hospital. And so today, because April is Head and Neck Cancer Awareness Month, we wanted to share a cooking class that can address some of the specific dietary needs that are commonly experienced by individuals undergoing treatment for this. So head and neck cancers include cancers of the mouth, the nose, and the throat, and it can be common for individuals with head and neck cancer to experience difficulties with chewing and swallowing. So when it's difficult to chew and swallow, we have to change the textures of the foods in order to help make swallowing safer. And when someone is not swallowing properly, it can be serious, as food and drink can go down the wrong way into the lungs and cause some issues with infection. So that's why we're going to teach you today how to safely make these different texture foods. So I'll let Jeremy take it away to start.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, so thanks, Michelle, for joining us today. We're going to be going through 3 recipes today, like we usually do. But what's going to be a little bit different is we're going to show you how to prepare them for a regular texture, as you would normally serve. But then we're also going to show you how to modify that for a mince texture and a puree texture, like Michelle mentioned. So there's going to be a lot of technique here. But like always, if you have any questions for Michelle, for Stephanie, or for myself, you can use the chat box in the little YouTube screen there. Okay, so for the first recipe, we're going to be making a salmon dish, fish dish, and the cooking technique is in papillote. This is a technique that we love to do all the time, and it's essentially cooking in paper. Okay, we're not using normal paper, we're using parchment paper. But what this is going to do is it's going to be a very gentle way to cook the ingredients. And because we're baking it, it ensures that we're not going to get any browning on the outside, which would be problematic if we're trying to make a puree with it afterwards. Okay, so we love this technique, and it just works really well for this puree and mince texture also. I'm going to bring you down to our cutting board. We're going to keep this fairly simple. But the most important piece here, obviously, is the parchment paper, okay? And we're going to take a large piece like this, and we're going to fold it in half. And then we're going to add our ingredients just to the bottom half of the parchment here, okay? And for the ingredients today, we want to, if we're going to be using this to mince and puree afterwards, we want to choose ingredients that will puree and mince pretty well. So what I chose here are some carrots. Now, these are just regular canned carrots. These are canned, softened carrots. You can use frozen carrots as well. But what I like about this is, like, they're already pretty soft. So you don't have to stress too much about, am I, cooking it enough in the oven? I don't know if you can see here, but I'm like pressing it between my finger. It's really, really nice and soft. So I know that, even if I'm undercooking it slightly, it's going to be still very, very soft, and it's going to puree really easily. Okay. I'm also adding some roasted peppers to there as well.
It's also
very
important to mention that also, even if you're using canned or frozen vegetables, you're still getting similar amount of vitamins and nutrients from them. A lot of times people are unsure if they're going to get the same amount of nutrients. So it's okay if you're using canned and frozen. And if you're worried about salt content, you can try and choose the canned vegetables with lower salt added to them.
Beautiful. And so I'm keeping it very simple. I'm just adding a little bit of olive oil, but you can add a little bit of salt and pepper too, for sure. If we're going to be adding seasonings, the thing I would keep in mind is not to add anything like dried herbs or anything that won't puree really well. So I would choose things that are ground and powdered. So like powdered garlic powder, onion powder would be great. You can, use like cumin powder, but any of the whole seeds or like oregano or dried thyme, that's going to have a really challenging time sort of pureeing. So those ones I would avoid. And then really quickly on these roasted peppers, these are the whole roasted peppers that you can find in the jar. I was looking in the fridge. I don't have it, but they're whole roasted peppers you can find in the jar. So the skins are removed, the seeds are removed, which is important. But also the treating of it is going to be different from any jarred vegetables that are already diced or chopped. Okay, so if you find peppers that are already pre-chopped or like sliced, or same thing goes with like tomatoes, diced tomatoes, they treat them with an additive that sort of helps them to keep their shape, which is good if I guess you're using it in a salsa or chili. But in the case where we want to cook it down so that it's soft enough to puree, that's going to be a problem. It's very hard to puree them because of that additive. So if you're using tomatoes, use whole tomatoes, canned whole tomatoes. And if you're using roasted peppers, use the whole version of it as well because they don't have that additive. Okay, so we have our fish. We have our veg. We're going to add our fish. So this is just a piece of fatty steelhead trout here, which is just has a lot more fat, which is going to just cook a lot better. It's going to stay a lot more juicy in there. And same thing with this. We can add a little bit of olive oil. We can add a little bit of salt. I'm going to add a little bit of lemon juice. The lemon juice is optional because I guess, Michelle, sometimes lemon juice or any acid could be a problem for some head and neck patients, right?
Yeah, so it's really individualized. Some people can tolerate cooking with some lemon or lime and other citrus, but if you find it's irritating to the mouth or you have mouth sores, then it might be something you want to avoid and instead seasoning with things like garlic powder or things that are a bit more mild. And I also really like the addition of the oil, Jeremy, because when our mouth is dry, it's really good to kind of add some oil to the food or when you're cooking your meats to add a little bit of extra moisture. But since the fish is also a higher fat, it's good. It's going to hold on to that moisture as well.
Yeah, perfect. And so in the case, if you're not going to use lemon juice, just add even like a tablespoon of water or stock. We just need a little bit of liquid in there to help sort of steam all the ingredients. Okay, so that's it. Pretty simple. Now to package it up, I'm going to take the top lid. It's going to go on top. And then we're going to just fold the edges. And I start from the back corner here. And I'm just going to fold it in just until it hits our ingredients. Take half of that and fold that in, half of that and fold that in. And so I'm just sort of creating this little crimping motion. It seems a lot harder than it is. Like you just want to create a seal. And you can do this with aluminum foil. If you want, it works the same way. But just sometimes, we get feedback from patients that you can get the metallic taste off of the aluminum foil. So that's usually why we go with the parchment. All right, so we're just crimping it all the way to the end. And then with that last piece, we fold under and just kind of pinch it. Okay, and what we have here is this really nice little food package, and that's ready for the oven. So this is going to go in 375 for about 10 to 15 minutes. General rule of thumb for fish is 10 to 15 minutes for every inch thickness on there. Okay, so that's going to go in the oven.
So one thing I just want to say is about omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so Michelle was talking about that fat that helps keep the texture and the fish moist, especially if people have dry mouth. But omega-3 fatty acids are really important because it's an anti-inflammatory property, right? So we know that cancer is an inflammatory disease, and so you want to have foods that are anti-inflammatory, and omega-3 is a great option. Now, omega-3 fatty acids are not made in our body, so we need to get them through food, and this is where having fish that are high in fat, like salmon, trout, sardines, cod, are really important to have at least 2 to 3 times a week. If you're someone who doesn't like fish, all good. You can always take a pill supplement, a fish oil. So that's your option. All right.
All right. So this is it done. Did one ahead of time in the parchment. And so what I'm going to do is I'll get my knife and we'll tear it open. And So what's really nice is, again, I can see fish is cooked. We'll test that by, just see if it flakes easily, which this does, which is perfect. The veg is nice and soft and it's cooked, and there's some nice moisture in there too that came off the veg, which we'll keep to add to the puree to help it puree, and that'll add some flavor. But most importantly, like I mentioned, there's no browning on top. Okay, so this is going to puree much easier than if I were to get a char or any crust over there. So this would be the regular plate, and you can top it with some nice pesto. Beautiful. That's how you would serve it. Now we're going to take this to the minced stage. Okay.
So Jeremy, I had a couple questions.
Yes.
Can they also cook this in a casserole dish with a lid if they don't have the parchment paper?
Yes, great question. So you can definitely do this in a dish with a lid, or even if you don't have a lid, just cover the dish with some foil, and you can do it that way. Absolutely. You just want to sort of trap it from any direct heat that would create that charring, but that would work as well. Yes.
Great. And when you're checking the fish, I think a lot of times people often overcook fish, and they might be worried that they're going to undercook it as well. Is there a way they can check? Because often when we overcook, it gets, a little drier.
Yeah, so, and it's a great question because everyone's oven is going to be a little bit different as well. So what I would say is always, you're going to do it once to sort of test it out, to figure it out. Always check at the lower end. So check at that 10-minute mark to see if it flakes apart easily. Once you start to see a lot of the white protein coming through, I don't know if you've ever, cooked fish before and you see sort of those like the white, almost like white foam on the outside. That's the proteins inside, and it's overcooking at that point. Okay. So check early, and then if you have to return it to the oven for a couple minutes, you can recover it and do that. But that's a great point. You don't want to overcook it for sure. All right, so have some of the veg here. I taken it off, and some of the fish as well. And what we want to do to make sure that we've cooked it enough for mince processing and for puree processing as well. I know it's a little far. What we're gonna do is take my knife, and I'm gonna try to mash through it. And if it mashes and separates really easily, then I know I've cooked it enough. So you can see I've worked through that a little bit. I know it's a little hard to see, but what we want to do is make sure that it'll fit through the spaces in a fork, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we're following the minced diet, we want to make sure that the pieces that are there are no more than 4 millimeters each, and that's about equivalent to the space in between the forks. So that's how we're going to test it later to make sure that it's meeting the minced requirements.
Now, I am doing this with a fork, with a smaller piece, but you can definitely do this with a food processor as well. And I would just sort of lightly pulse it in there until you get sort of the same size. But you can see, I mean, it takes like not even 20 seconds to work through this little piece here. And again, making sure that the pieces are small enough to fit through the spaces of your fork. And if you need to add a little bit of moisture to help, you can do that, from either the juices from the parchment package, or you just add a little bit of stock, or like Michelle mentioned before, you can even add a little bit more fat and olive oil.
Yeah, adding some cooking oil can be helpful if you do need to gain weight or you're having trouble maintaining weight. That's a way to add it to vegetables or your meat, such as olive oil or safflower oil. That could be a way to add a bit more calories to your meal. And so I guess with the fish, you can flake it pretty easily, but if you were doing a minced meat, you would have to use the food processor.
Yeah, the food processor would just be a lot easier. And I'm going to show you the food processor in a second. But what I'm doing here is now just doing the same thing with the fish, and I'm working through the vegetables. And again, it's nice and soft. It's breaking up really easily with the fork here. And again, you just want to make sure that it's small enough to fit through the tines. We call it the tines. I don't know. Do you guys call it the tines? Tines of a fork, or the spaces of a fork?
I don't use that fancy of a word for it, but now I know what it is.
I may have made it up. Someone will fact check me. I may have made it up. We'll see.
And I just want to add, sometimes with like minced textures, sometimes, or even puree, the way that you're incorporating those vegetables are in a different form, right? So it might take some getting used to, and some trial and error onto, what feels right for you. But just an add-on here, you're still able to get the antioxidants and those phytonutrients from the different colors in vegetables and fruit. So here we're getting those bright red, those bright orange. So we're getting more vitamin A from the orange. We're getting some lycopene and some vitamin C from those red peppers. So just kind of remembering that you still are able to eat the color of the rainbow as you transition into perhaps a new texture of the diet that you're experiencing.
Okay, so I've minced this to the texture that we need it to be safe for mince compliant. Let me see if I can get you, you know what, I'll put it up to the screen just to get it a little bit closer.
So I'm just going to review what the requirements are for a mince diet as we look at that. So as we mentioned, we need the pieces to be no more than the 4 millimeters. But the goal is also to have it soft and moist. We don't want any liquids leaking or dripping from the foods. It's basically, we don't want to have, biting is not required for this texture. Minimal chewing is required. And we need to make sure that there's not a lot of lumps in it. And if they are, they're small enough that they can be mashed with the tongue. And food can be easily mashed with just a little bit of pressure from the fork. So you saw Jeremy do that as he was going through the vegetables and the fish as well. And you should be able to also scoop it onto a fork with no liquid or crumbles of food coming off of the fork as well. And then we're going to show the spoon test, I think, as well, to make sure the food is not too sticky. So you'll see that a bit later for both our minced and our pureed foods.
Yes. All right. So there's the texture for the mince, and what we can do after that. So I'm going to plate it real quickly. And these are nice techniques to make it a little bit more pleasing, more appetizing. Even though it's in a smaller texture, it doesn't have to look, non-appetizing. So what you can do is get these little molds, little ring molds. I've even made them with foil. You can kind of just shape it around a cup. And then use that mold. And then what you can do is fill it in. And I don't know if you guys can see that well, but we put the vegetables on the bottom, a little bit of that minced salmon on top. And then we're going to do our dressing, our pesto dressing in a second. But you can see already, it looks a lot more appetizing versus if we just sort of piled it on a plate separately. Right?
Yeah. So you can even just kind of use the cookie cutters you have at home or buy these at the local store. So I think this is great because we really do eat with our eyes, and especially when we have to change the texture, it's even more important to use different colors of foods and contrasting them on the plate. And also the way we shape it is helpful as well. And this is going to help enhance appetite with this kind of food and meal, especially in the beginning stages when someone's transitioning over to a new texture of food. And even if you go on Amazon, they have specialized food molds that, look like carrots or look like the chicken. So you can use those to even make them look a little bit more like the original food using your minced and pureed foods.
Yes, perfect. And so the last thing here, so we have our veg, we have our salmon or our trout on top. And then for our sauce, for our regular, what we did was we just had a pesto. And you can make one from scratch. You can have the store-bought pesto. But the issue with some of these pestos, even if they're store-bought, is sometimes, I think Michelle was saying, they can come out too thick, right? They can come way too hard. And then sometimes they can come out a little too loose, and you're going to see a lot of separation between the basil, the herbs, and the oil, which can be an issue. So a way that we can make it a little more consistent so that it's mince compliant and puree compliant is we're going to puree this through with an avocado. And that's going to help to sort of pull everything in place. And then we can make sure that there's no separation from that oil and from that herb. So we're going to add this avocado, puree it with this, and you can do this in a blender, food processor. And we're going to get it to a nice consistency where it's spoonable, but that it falls off the spoon as well. And we're going to show you that test again in a second with the purees, but you can see it's nice and spoonable. And I'm going to add just a nice little bit on top. And there's our mince compliant dish, beautiful. And then for the purees, we're gonna get our food processor out because we do want this pureed now. And I'm gonna change the angle here. Can you see the food processor a little bit in the back?
Yes, we can see it.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of constricted by the length of the plug, but I think we'll be okay. And what I'm gonna do is add that piece of fish. And I'll just break it up by hand at the beginning just to make it a little bit easier, a little bit smaller pieces in here. Okay. And if it's very, very moist, then you probably don't have to add any extra liquid. You can kind of tell the first couple times you pulse it up. But then if you do have to add a little bit, again, you can add olive oil, you can add a little bit of stock or water, or if you do have some of that cooking juice left in the parchment paper or baking dish or wherever you're baking it in, you can add a little bit of that as well. Now it's important not to add too much liquid at the beginning because we don't want to make this soupy, right? This should still hold its shape. All right, so I'm gonna pulse this through. Maybe I'll turn my mic off. That way I don't blow everyone's ear.
Michelle, I know that there was something that you wanted me to ask. I closed down all my windows.
That's okay. I just wanted to review some of the signs of difficulty chewing and swallowing because some people might not know what to look out for. So those things include if you're coughing or choking when you're eating or drinking, if you feel like food is getting stuck in your throat frequently as you're eating, this can be a sign that there's difficulty swallowing. If you're holding food in your mouth for longer and it's hard to bring it to the back of your throat, this can be a sign. Or if you're having a really gurgly voice after eating, or noticing a lot of excessive throat clearing while eating or drinking, or just after eating or drinking. And so these things are all important to mention to your doctor because they do need to be assessed further. As we mentioned, it is, it can have some serious side effects if we're not matching the kind of diet texture we need to make our swallowing safer. So you should let your doctor know, and your doctor can send a referral to the speech language pathologist, and they're healthcare professionals that specialize in managing swallowing disorders, and they provide specific recommendations to individuals to help them have safer swallowing. And as well, also getting a referral to the dietitian like Stephanie or I. And this is because when someone has difficulty swallowing, it can be harder to get all of your nutrients or eat as much as you used to. So we want to make sure you're getting enough of the nutrition as well, and teaching you how to follow the diet as well.
Yeah, I know that sometimes, people wish that they could have crunchy things or different tastes and textures, and it's really about safety. And I know that a lot of times, even if someone's experiencing GI issues, right, where they have to kind of have less vegetables or fruit, etc. But then they say, but I need, everybody's telling me that, healthy eating includes lots of vegetables. And, I just always like to reiterate the fact that you still can get those, nutrients in. It's just in a different way, and looking at it in maybe a different creative way, and spinning how you used to do it in a safe way for your own swallowing.
Oh.
Oh no. Oh no, he's all fished. Maybe Nat, our tech superhuman. There we go. You're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what we want to do is essentially we're making a mousse with this salmon or the trout. And again, we want to puree until it's really nice and smooth. We don't want any chunks or any solid pieces in there as well. And what we can do to test for this, just to make sure it's the right consistency, we call it the spoon tilt test. Michelle, does that, I know that at school we call it the spoon tilt. Yeah, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a nice little mound of it on our spoon here, like this, and we're going to tilt it, and it should hold its shape, right?
Yes, so we don't want any like dripping over the spoon, but as we turn it, we want to make sure it kind of plops right off the spoon and we're not getting a lot of leftover food staying on the spoon. So
Right,
this means that it's not too sticky, right? We'll make sure we can move it around in our mouth. Okay.
Now, if you do find that it's too firm, it's not coming off the spoon like it is here, and it's sticking, then you would just want to introduce some more liquid, some more oil, some more fat, and then process it again just until you get to this state. And then the same thing, if it's not mounding like Michelle mentioned and it's sort of falling off, then you kind of have to adjust. So hopefully you have a little bit more fish, or you can introduce something, a vegetable that's cooked and starchy. So if I had some more leftover cooked carrots, I could put that in there and whip it up again with the carrots because that would help firm it up, or even some avocado as well. That would work.
Or even if you have some leftover sweet potatoes or something in your fridge when you're making these. Yeah.
Perfect.
We like the addition of the avocado to bump up the calories, though, especially if you're needing more calories. Yeah.
There you go. And then the last thing here is, like, we've done the test. We know how it works. But sometimes with the food processor, with the blender, if you're doing this manually at home, you might miss a couple little pieces here and there. So what we do is, we say when in doubt, strain it out. And what you can do is you can get a sieve. This is like a little mesh sieve. You can find these at most grocery stores or like food surplus stores. You can probably even order them on Amazon. And make sure you get the fine mesh ones. That way we try to remove as many of the particles as possible. And what we're going to do is just pass it through this sieve. So that way, just in case we missed any larger chunks, we know that we can catch those through the sieve. And this will actually help to puree it to an even smoother consistency by passing it through here. So this is commonly done in restaurants. If you want like a super, super smooth sauce or puree, you're going to pass it through either a sieve or a tammy is another like just really fine mesh sieve. All right, and you can use either a spatula or a spoon, and we're just going to run it through the sieve. And yes, this takes a little bit of extra work, but it shouldn't be too much. And the idea is that we do want to make sure that we are getting it really nice and smooth. All right, and I can see it's coming through nicely on the other side. All right, and we're just gonna, again, push it through with your spatula or your sieve until you get it mostly through. And if there's a lot of particles left behind, then you can also run those through your food processor again or your blender again. And so, yeah.
The goal of this is just to get rid of some of the larger particles that haven't broken up in the blender. We shouldn't be using any fish that have bones or gristle or meat that has like cartilage in it before putting it in the blender, right, Jeremy?
That's correct, yeah. And again, even if you buy something that will have it removed, it's not always guaranteed. So this is just another way to catch it just in case. All right, so now we're going to plate, and I guess I can use the same ring here. And I've done the same thing with our vegetables. So pureed them to their nice smooth consistency. We'll do that spoon tilt test. Comes off, mounds nicely, comes off the spoon really easily. And so we'll plate, right? And again, this obviously the plating and getting chefy doesn't have to happen every time, but I think it does make a big difference, especially when you're working with textures where the appearances aren't, what you're used to.
And I think you can also kind of play around, maybe have a little fun when it comes to plating these things. You could choose to put the vegetables on top sometimes, or maybe on the side if you want to see the two different colors on your plate.
Yes, absolutely.
But usually we need some kind of sauce on the meat or sauce on the vegetables as well.
All right, so we'll put that on there. And then again, finishing with our avocado pesto sauce. And again, just doing a quick little test. This comes off. And again, if it's seized up a little bit, just introduce a little bit more liquid in there. And we'll put a little bit of that sauce. And there we go. Shows you our regular, and then here's our mince. And here's our puree.
Great.
And then, again, just to mention quickly, like Michelle was saying before, we don't want any separation, which sometimes you can get from vegetables because of the water content. So again, you can see on the plate that there is no liquid separation there. In the case that you do, you can always run those through, like even a little bit of starch. That helps. Even a little bit of cornstarch, it'll help to kind of pull some of that excess moisture in. Okay,
Great.
There we go.
Great.
It looks great. I think our sauce, we could even do a little thinner. Like if people wanted a little thinner, they could do that as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, but it looks good.
All right. So moving on. I know it's a long one.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get a lot quicker through the next
The
recipe.
next one is a nice like comfort food, right? So we're doing a mac and cheese. So that texture is also really important.
I'm just washing the dish out here. Be there in a second.
We have to clean as we go as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as Michelle had mentioned, oftentimes because there's some swallowing issues, people tend to have a low appetite or maybe not eat as much, and there's weight loss. And so we know that it's super important to get those nutrients in, but you want to make sure that every bite counts. All right, so we load up on proteins and healthy fats. So in the previous recipe, we did that by adding some avocado or olive oil. This mac and cheese is another way to really get in those extra fats and protein with cheese.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so what we're gonna do is pretty simple, but I want to show you how to make a nice cheese sauce from scratch. Maybe a little ambitious. We're gonna keep it quick. So you're going to join me on the second camera here. So I'm at my pot. And what I've done is I started melting about a tablespoon of, actually a tablespoon and a half butter. Okay, and then once it's nice and melted, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of flour. Okay, so traditionally when you're making a roux, and that's what we're doing here, it's usually about 1-to-1. But I don't want this to become super thick. I actually want this to be a little bit looser because we are going to be blending it with our pasta afterwards. So I'm adding our flour here, and I'm just going to whisk it in until it incorporates. Okay, and the most important thing when we're making a roux is that we're cooking this out. So we do want to cook the flour part out, which takes about a minute or so, and you can. It's when you stop smelling the flour. When you stop smelling that sort of raw flour, you know it's done. You might even start to see a little bit of color on there, which is good. Okay, and then once that's done, we're going to introduce some spices, some flavors. Traditionally, cheese sauce, you can just keep it plain, but we wanted to make this a little bit more interesting, add a little bit more character. So what we're going to do, I don't know what camera to go for, but I'm going to go here, this one here, make sure you can see it. Okay, and so we have a little bit of smoked paprika, which is nice. And I'm adding a little bit of turmeric as well. And this is going to help to give it that orange color, especially if I'm not using an orange colored cheese, which in this case we're using just a cheddar, a sharp white cheddar. So this will actually help to give it that nice orange color as well. So we're going to add, and here you can add anything. So Michelle, what are some of the flavors that you would probably add here?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to add that even doing the turmeric and paprika is a good way to add some flavor, especially if somebody is experiencing bland taste changes. And I like that it's going to add that color as well. We do really want to try and enhance the color. And even with this one, I hear a lot of times people are, we can't have crunchy things on a minced or pureed diet, so people are missing their chips or other things that might be crunchy. So we thought that with this mac and cheese would be a fun way. You could even buy, again, we can use the powdered seasoning. So you can buy like the popcorn powdered flavors. They have barbecue ones or ketchup chip flavor. And every once in a while, you could add this to this sauce if you wanted to try something new. Keeping in mind it's going to add some more salt to the recipe, but I think once in a while to have something different, it could be an option.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm pretty good here. I'm happy with this. I don't smell that raw flour aroma anymore. We've got our spices that are toasting up. They're getting very fragrant. So then I'm going to go ahead and add our liquid. Now, it's important for a cheese sauce that we don't want it to break. We don't want it to get grainy, which can happen sometimes if you're making a cheese sauce. And so there's a couple things that you can do to prevent that. The first thing is use a higher fat milk. So use a whole milk in this case. I wouldn't go for a skim milk. Even 2%, you're kind of chancing it. Just because the lower fat milks can break a lot easier when we're introducing it to heat. Okay, and I'm doing this, speaking of heat, I'm doing this over a medium heat. And what I want to do is just add this in slowly, a little bit at a time. All right, and we're going to whisk it in as we do that.
And usually we're recommending the 3% milk as well if somebody is having difficulty eating enough food. So that fits well with our recommendations.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to add about a full cup in whole, but I don't want to add, the reason I add it slowly as well is because the milk is probably going to be on the colder side, and we don't want to completely cool the sauce down, or again, you might break it. Okay, we'll add a little bit more.
So Jared, this is the sauce that you're making, but if someone wanted to use like cheese, can they do that?
Yeah, so we're gonna add cheese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna add cheese, but we always add it near the end.
Okay.
And we're actually going to add the cheese. So once this comes up to a simmer, we want this to come up to a simmer. Once it comes up to a simmer, we're going to take it off the heat, and that's where we're going to add our cheese. If we were to add our cheese while it's hot on there, again, you're going to get this like grainy, you might get this grainy texture after. You might cause the cheese, which is essentially like fat and water, to separate. And we don't want that either because we do want it nice and homogeneous, right? In the case that does happen, it's okay, don't throw it out. You can just run it through a blender or stick an immersion blender in there and whiz it up. And that should give it enough to sort of get back to that creamy state. Okay?
And what about for those who are vegan? So wanting like either maybe a lactose-free option or a more plant-based one?
Yeah, so you can definitely use a vegan cheese. I know we were talking about this briefly before. Michelle, did you have a brand or a specific one that you know works?
Yeah, I think it would take some experimenting because some of the vegan cheeses are made from tapioca flours and they might not melt as easily. But the Daya cream cheese or the vegan cream cheeses may melt a little bit better, adding them again, like you said, at the end as well. Or you could even, the same way we're going to mince and puree these, you could buy pre-made mac and cheeses, whether it's vegan or regular, and you could make those especially for a quicker meal. But again, if it tells you to cook it with the top off, we want you to cook it with the top on so you're not getting the browning on top.
Yeah, great point. So again, just waiting for it to simmer. I mean, this is a live cooking show. Right, this happens, but we're getting there. I'm watching the camera.
That's okay. We'll fill the time. The other option is buying like lactose-free cheese or lactose-free milk. If you are a little bit sensitive to dairy and milk, you can try that.
Perfect. And as this gets there, I'll mention briefly about the cheese. I mean, we're just using a regular cheese today. This is just an aged cheddar. It's going to get some more flavor, which is great. But I grated this from hand, and that's important. Back to my earlier point in the first recipe, with any pre-cut vegetables that are jarred or processed, any pre-shredded cheese is also usually treated with an additive to help it keep its shape. We don't want it to keep its shape. We want it to melt. We want to break it down. So I would avoid any pre-shredded, any pre-grated cheeses in that case. Just grate it yourself, or even just like chop it up. If you don't have a grater, you can even chop it up into chunks. It'll melt pretty easily.
Oh.
You're mute. We were saying that Mercury was retrograde, and that usually means that technology does not work properly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. I was going to say we'll narrate for you if we need to.
All right, we're good. So you got the point about the cheese? Don't use pre-grated? Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and add this now. I can see it simmering nicely. So now I'm going to take it actually off the heat. And turn the heat off. I just want to make sure you can still see it. Okay. Okay, and this is when I'm going to add in my cheese. Okay, about a cup-ish in here. All right, we can just let that sort of melt on its own. Stir that through. And again, the residual heat from the simmering milk will help it to melt the way we want it. And again, if it's not melted exactly, if it's starting to split a bit, or if it's getting a little bit grainy, you can just run that through a food processor again. All right, so we have our cheese sauce. Now for our pasta. I'm going to bring it down here. So we use, just a classic elbow macaroni. If you're doing it regular, you want to cook it until, it says on the box, cook it until it's, nice and we say al dente. And that's good for our mac and cheese, for our regular. And in that case, we can.
So that's for the when you say regular, you mean regular diet?
Regular, yeah. Consistency, yeah. The regular texture there, yeah. Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and add some of that cheese sauce to there. Right, and actually, I'm going to do that in a ramekin. So I have a ramekin. We'll add some of the regular. I'm doing this like fast mode now. Kind of beat the clock. So there's a regular one. We'll add our cheese sauce. And if I want to top it with some extra cheese on top, we're going to broil this to get some of that nice golden color on top. So we would pop that under the broiler.
It looks great. I imagine though that like as we go through the next steps with minced meat, you'd actually maybe want to have more sauce. Like you'd want to save that sauce, right? Like maybe you'd want more because you want it to get dry.
Yeah, so when we're working with the purees and the minces, we're going to want to add a little bit more sauce as we need. So that was the regular texture done in the oven. For our mince and our puree, we want to overcook the pasta quite a bit until it's soft enough. With like our other foods, we want to be able to break this up with our fork. So we take the noodle, and with very little effort, you can see I'm breaking this up into small pieces that fit between, I think someone in the chat mentioned prongs. That's a better word. Prongs of our fork. Right, and so we can see, yes.
How long did you cook this one for?
So it's a good question. I almost doubled up the instructions on the recipe. So I think it's at 10 minutes, and so I went for 20.
Okay.
But you're going to have to test it as you go.
Okay. Can you use salt in the water? Because some people like to cook their pasta with salt, or is that going to affect the texture?
No, yeah, you can use a little bit of salt. I think the main thing that you do want to do is after you cook the pasta, you drain it and you do want to rinse it in water, okay? The rinsing of the water is going to wash away the starch. Again, if you're making a regular plate of pasta, disregard that. You don't want to, rinse away the starch. But for mince and puree, if we don't rinse away the starch, it's going to get very gummy and very gluey when we process it through a food processor. So you do want to rinse that away. And you can tell, like, this is cooled pasta. Normal pasta would not be this loose as it sits. If there was starch, it would like kind of clump together, right? So we've rinsed that starch away so we can just process it a lot easier. So for a mince, again, you can work this through a fork. If you have to make a bigger portion, run it through a food processor for sure. And I've done that in advance here.
And I remember you saying use like a more individual sized food processor if it's just for one person. So when you have a large one, it'll be kind of hard for the blades to get around all of the food. So I think you've mentioned that to me before.
Yeah, that's a great point. So you do want to use a food processor that's appropriately sized for the amount of food that you do use. Do you guys still see me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting weird messages. If you do use a little bit of food in a large food processor, there's not enough yield, there's not enough volume in there for it to actually work properly. So I have like a small one here because I'm doing smaller portions. If you do larger portions, then get yourself like a medium or large size food processor to accommodate for that. All right, so I mixed my cheese sauce in with the minced here as is, and this is ready to go. If I did want to warm it up a little bit, just make sure we cover it. The difference being is that we don't want any of that browning on top with the cheese here. But here we know it's nice and minced. I've already tested it with my fork with the pasta, and the sauce is nice and creamy, and it'll sort of hold.
Yeah, and the sauce is not dripping or separating, so that's good. That means it's appropriate for the mince texture.
Yes, perfect. And then for our puree, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to run it through our food processor with the pasta. So we'll add some of the pasta, and we can go a little bit at a time there, just to test it out. But I'll add a little bit of that, again, overcooked. And we're going to add some of that cheese sauce in there. Again, don't worry if it starts to separate a little bit because we're going to be processing this. And just start with a little bit at a time and correct as you need. So again, if it's too soft, too saucy, add more of the pasta. If it's way too thick, you add a little bit more of the cheese sauce. We're looking for that texture that's going to pass the spoon tilt test. So run that through. I did one before. Speed things up. And again, nice and creamy. Pass it through a sieve if you need to. And then the spoon tilt test, again, holds and mounds nicely. There's no drippage, no separation. And then as we tilt, it comes off nice and easily. And then we can go ahead and add that to our ramekin before service. And if you did want to warm this up, like if it is cooling, which likely it will as you're going through the process, the best way to do it with the starches, because we don't want to dry them out too much, is use these little ramekins. You can wrap them with a little bit of cling film and then put them in a shallow simmering water. We call it like a bain-marie. And you can keep that just like lightly warm, nice and simmering so that this stays warm, but you're not going to get any of like the browning or the skin forming on top. And so what you would do is get that cling film and just press it to the surface. And that way, when you take it off, it's still nice and fresh and you don't get a different texture sort of forming there. Okay, so we have our mince, we have our puree, and we have a regular. It's hot, working hot here. All right. So again, just to show you the differences here, we have a little bit of browning on the regular, which we don't want on the other. But there we have.
Great.
A regular mince and puree mac and cheese.
Love it.
Great. And then for the minced one, you can actually, if you don't have noodles or you want something different, you can use like short grain rices or quinoa. But we just need to make sure that when you mix it in the sauce, again, it holds together on the spoon. It's fitting through the prongs of the fork. And it shouldn't be sticky or gluey or separate into separate grains. For the pureed diet, it does have to be all done smooth and put through the food processor for any of the grains that you use.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I know we're almost at the end. We're gonna go really quickly to get through this dessert here.
I believe our dessert is with cherries. So what a way to kind of get that like summer feel. I don't know if cherries are a summer fruit, although I will say I have cherries all year round. I love them. I use a lot of frozen, and just a hot tip for everybody. They are just as nutritious as fresh. They are picked at the peak of their freshness and processed in a certain way where all those nutrients are locked in. So I'm sure, if I know Jeremy correctly, we're using some frozen ones here, but they are delicious. You know, you can have them all year round and enjoy those antioxidants, those bright purple red colors.
Yes, they are frozen cherries. Love frozen cherries. To make a very, very simple cherry sauce, we take our frozen cherries, about 1.5 cups. We're gonna add a little bit of honey for sweetness, and then a little squeeze of lemon juice. Again, like Michelle mentioned, lemon juice is optional. If you don't tolerate it well, then you can just use a little bit of water in there instead. Or you can even use the lemon zest, actually, or just a piece of the lemon peel, and then that way you can remove it afterwards, just to give it some of that lemon flavor. So that you're gonna simmer about 10-15 minutes until it thickens up nicely, and you have this really nice kind of syrupy cherry sauce, which again, we're using cherries instead of strawberries or blueberries. And Michelle, like, you know, what's the reason behind that?
Yeah, so the reason is we don't want to have the seeds stuck in the mixture of the fruit mixture, because seeds can kind of get caught when we're swallowing. So we want to make sure that it's nice and blended, and the frozen cherries already have the pits removed, so that's an even better reason to get those. And we're still getting the benefits, the health benefits from those bright red and purple kind of fruits that you would also get from the berries. So that's what makes cherries a good option for this.
Perfect. So we have the cherries, and now this would be for the regular texture, just because you still have the chunks of cherries or larger chunks of cherries in there. Run this through your food processor until you get a nice, smooth, creamy cherry sauce like this. Which again, tilt test, right? The spoon tilt test. I don't know if you can see that. Right, and again, you can thin it out, thicken it out as you need, but pass this through a sieve just to be sure. Those frozen cherries, again, the beautiful thing about them is that they're already pitted, which is nice, but you can never be too safe. Run it through a sieve. I have found a pit in the past before. It's very rare, but just run it through a sieve just to make sure, and you're gonna just end up with a nice creamier sauce anyways. So there's our sauce. And then for our custard component, what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple little pieces of, I guess they call this laughing cow. We call it like formaggino. I think that's a made up word. I'm not sure. But it's like a cream cheese, like a nice soft cheese. And we're going to add just a little bit of that and some nice yogurt. And a thicker yogurt. You can use a higher fat yogurt if you want. In there.
And we're making sure with any cheeses we use, they're always pasteurized, none of the raw cheeses. And the yogurt's a great option as well, good source of protein. Just keeping in mind for those that are receiving cancer treatment or have a lower immune system, that we're just choosing the regular yogurts and not the ones that say the word probiotics on it or extra probiotics. We don't want to get too many of those when someone's immune system is lower. So the regular ones are fine if it doesn't label probiotics on the front. It should be okay.
And then I guess, Michelle, the same point for honey, like you choose a pasteurized honey, right?
Yes, it would have to all be pasteurized.
So
if you're ever unsure from a food safety perspective, ask your doctor or the dietitian.
Perfect. So I had a little bit of vanilla extract in there as well. And we're just going to mix that up. Right.
So if somebody couldn't have honey, they could use another sweetener in there, maybe like a maple syrup or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, maple syrup would work really, really well. Yeah. Yeah, and we don't need to make it too sweet. Like our cherry sauce is already going to be nice and sweet. This is just going to add just a little bit more. It is a dessert. All right, so we whisked it all together. Nice and creamy. Again, you shouldn't have chunks because everything is nice and soft and smooth that we're adding to this. But if you do want to run it through a food processor just to be sure, you can definitely do that. So we have the cherry, we have the custard, and we have our angel food cake. You can make this yourself if you're feeling ambitious. Otherwise, no problem getting the store-bought, already made ones or the boxed ones. I'm going to show you using that just because it's a little bit easier too. The only thing, so for our regular, we could just tear it off as is and assemble into whatever dish you're doing. Add a little bit of that custard mixture, that custard yogurt mixture to there. And then a little bit of that cherry sauce as we go. And then back up, layer it again. So we'll do like a 2-layer thing here. Take your time, make it prettier. I'm running against the clock. Couple cherries.
I can attest to them being a little bit prettier the last time we met to go through this. But they still look great.
For the mince, what we're going to do is we're going to remove any of those brown bits on top, right? We went through this before with the fish. We don't want to get any of those brown bits because it won't mince easily. And then with just the white part of the cake, we're going to throw it into a bowl, okay? And we're going to add a little bit of the syrup, the thin syrup, to that from the cherries. You can even do milk if you want.
I'm just going to add, Jeremy, so there shouldn't be any regular dry breads or cakes on a minced diet or a pureed diet because they are a choking risk. So that's why we're modifying this by adding moisture, and we're also going to change the texture of it by either blending. In this way, we're going to mash for the minced and make sure it meets all the minced requirements with our fork test.
All right, so we're going to mash that up with that liquid. And again, if we need more, we'll add a little bit more. You don't want to go too much. We just want to make it just moist enough so that it breaks apart easily. I know we're just past 1, but we're almost done.
And this would be okay with these like sponge cakes, but a regular bread probably wouldn't mince with the fork. So just keeping that in mind, we don't want any like lumps or anything like that in it.
Yeah. So you can see this is breaking up very easily with our fork. Again, same thing. Make sure it passes small enough to pass through the twines of the fork there. But we also don't want to make it too soupy where if we lifted it up with our fork, sort of like dripping down below. We don't want that either, right? So really nice and minced here, which is perfect. So that's what we would do for our cake. Put it into, and we'll just do 1 layer here just to show you. We're going to put it into our little dish. And then again, we know that our yogurt custard is nice and smooth. So that's going to go on top. And then the sauce that we pureed. Again. And we'll put a little bit of that on top. So we have this really nice cherry trifle there. And then the last thing with our cake puree, we're going to want to run that through our food processor. All right. And again, add a little bit of that cherry sauce or add a little bit of milk, a little bit of moisture, just so we know that we can get a nice puree. We'll do a little bit at a time, not too much. Make sure you put it on correctly, which I'm not doing. Okay. Run it through. Every once in a while, you might need to just work down the sides. Right? And I can see I need a little bit more product in there as well.
So even with the minced cake that we're making, everything is individualized. So even if you're told you need a minced diet, if you're still having trouble eating certain foods like the minced cake, then you may need to also puree this. So I think it's important to also kind of in and listen to any signs that things might not be going down the right way.
All right, we're getting there. I'm really struggling with this lid.
That's okay.
Okay. And again, any product that comes up the sides, you just want to stop it. Make sure we puree again. Okay, beautiful. So I can see it's really nice consistency now on our cake, just to show you. And again, run it through your sieve again, just in case. We're gonna have this really nice mound of the cake, and then it should come off easily, which is what we want. Beautiful. And then again, layer into our little ramekin. So we're making this look a little fancier. And I've added some of the custard already into that cake, so I don't have to add it again, but I want. And we can just add a little bit of that cherry sauce on top. It's pureed. And there we go. We have our mince, regular, and puree for our cherry vanilla trifle. And that's the last recipe. I know it was a little late, but we did it.
We did it. There was a lot to go through. I am going to direct anyone, if they do need more information about how to follow minced or pureed diets, you can go to the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative website. So it's www.iddsi.org, and they do have resources for individuals that explain how to follow a minced and pureed diet as well.
I added it to the chat. And we'll be adding it in the description of the videos as well. These videos will be posted shortly with some notes from Michelle and the recipes in detail. But thank you, Michelle, so much for joining us today in celebration for Head and Neck Cancer Month, Awareness Month. And
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Thanks for sticking around. I know we went a little long, but I really appreciate you joining us today. And don't forget to, for all of our classes on our YouTube channel, on the third Thursday of every month, we are back in May. The next third Thursday, I think it's the 20th, third Thursday. I think Michelle's checking, I'm not sure, but I think it's the 20th. But again, for any questions that you might have, you can always reach out to us. But otherwise, thank you so much. Take care. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you again.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.